After President Biden went nearly 80 days without a press conference, members of the press yesterday were eager to finally have a crack at the president. And in some ways, the president didn't disappoint, offering some lines that won't soon be forgotten. Among them, a statement that effectively gave Russian President Vladimir Putin permission to make a minor incursion into Ukraine.
Russia will be held accountable if it invades, and it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and then we end up having a fight about what to do and not do, et cetera.
Are you saying that a minor incursion by Russia into Ukrainian territory would not lead to the sanctions that you have threatened, or are you effectively giving Putin permission to make a small incursion into the country?
Good question. That's how it did sound like, didn't it?
Joining me now to talk about the president's remarks yesterday and more is U.S. Congressman Pat Fallon, who serves on the House Armed Services Committee and also on the Oversight Committee. He represents the 4th Congressional District of Texas. Congressman, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Tony. I appreciate it. God bless.
So let me ask you this question, Congressman. What is a minor incursion?
You know, that's what I'm sure Vladimir Putin is wondering, too. Is seizing the Crimea, which he did in 2014, is that a minor incursion? Is stealing a few provinces from Georgia, which he did in 2008, is that a minor incursion? And maybe Putin thinks that if he just takes, a third of the Ukraine, takes the eastern Ukraine, maybe that's a minor incursion and that'll be okay with Joe Biden. That was a complete and utter disastrous press conference in many ways, but that was probably the biggest mistake, and that may be the one that'll go down in history.
Well, speaking of Russia, it was recently announced that they will be hosting joint naval exercises with China and Iran. What do we know about that, and what are your thoughts?
Well, that's the biggest concern we have, on the Armed Services Committee, Tony, is what if, the nightmare scenarios, if the Chinese communists were to cross over and try to invade Taiwan synchronously with Russia attacking Ukraine, what would be the United States response? And Joe Biden has not signaled strength. Let's be very honest about it. This shouldn't be a partisan issue. This is an American issue. If he had signaled strength, I don't think that we'd be having this conversation right now. But when you signal weakness and wokeness, you don't know. All bets are off. You saw the disaster in Afghanistan. It was an absolute catastrophe. And I find it interesting that the Chinese were not they weren't taking their saber and rattling it under the 4 years of President Trump, nor was Putin. And that is very telling.
Yeah, we were just discussing yesterday the Open Doors USA, their annual report on religious persecution. The persecution of Christians is where they focus. And for the first time in a long time, North Korea was bumped from its #1 position and replaced by Afghanistan. Afghanistan now being the most dangerous place in the world to be a Christian. You cannot decouple that from U.S. foreign policy.
No, there's no doubt. And in fact, I asked Tony, Secretary Austin and General Milley directly at an Armed Services Committee meeting, could they guarantee the American people that there were 5,000 scumbag prisoners being held at Bagram? And when Biden made the decision to draw down from 2,500 troops to 600, the military told him they couldn't hold Bagram, the embassy, and Kabul airport, so they abandoned Bagram. Those 5,000 prisoners were there. They escaped soon thereafter. And I asked, can you guarantee the American people that none of those 5,000 were part of the murder of 13 of our service members? And they could not. And then I also asked, could you guarantee the American people that those 5,000 weren't part of the 70,000, most of which we didn't know who they were, that came to the United States? And they said they could not. That's what we're talking about here. And elections have consequences. And this has been just a disaster on the domestic front and internationally.
Pat, I want to go back to the president's press conference yesterday, another remark that he made that's gotten some attention. This is, play clip number 4 of the president, please.
Look, I didn't overpromise, but I have probably outperformed what anybody thought would happen. The fact of the matter is that we're in a situation where we have made enormous progress.
Is the president dwelling in a parallel political universe?
Tony, that is just sheer and utter delusion. I mean, he's tried to inject roughly, well, if he had his way, about $6 trillion into the economy. And all it did was create the greatest rise of inflation we've seen in 40 years. Not since 1981 have we seen this kind of inflation. And I doubt the 7% number is accurate when you consider, that fuel's up 50%, home heating is up 30%, used cars up 25%, foodstuffs and meat about 15 to 20%, homes 13 to 30%. So it's been, again, I keep saying catastrophe and disaster, but that's what's happened here. We have a supply chain crunch. We have a labor shortage, and our economy's not growing. The jobs numbers in December missed the mark by 56%. And that's what you're seeing. You saw the results the American people really thought in November in the elections in New Jersey and Virginia and some of the special elections across the country. And you're seeing it now in the polls. And I think in November, we're not going to have a red wave. We're going to have a red tsunami.
Congressman Fallon, here's a clip of the president responding to a question about the midterm elections and whether or not he thought they would be illegitimate if states have their way.
I'm not saying it's going to be legit. It's the increase in the prospect of being illegitimate is in direct proportion to us not being able to get these reforms passed.
So what he's telling the American people, if the Democrats can't federalize the elections, then the outcome is not legitimate?
Yeah, that's what they're saying. And of course, every time they don't get their way with, horrible pieces of legislation like H.R. 1 and H.R. 4, and then their attempt to stuff a bill that was pretty innocuous about NASA and adding that and trying to put those bills and, resuscitate them through that trick. It's unbelievable that they would say that you're trying to save democracy. First of all, we're a representative republic, and you don't save democracy by putting your thumb on the scale and taking the states' rights away. By the way, their constitutional rights to run the elections as they see fit and have the DOJ become an overlord, where if you just make a minor change, you need their approval. You want felons to vote immediately upon release from prison. That's unconstitutional. That violates the 14th Amendment, Section 2. And you want to eviscerate voter ID, have universal mail-in ballots, and then force the Treasury to give any donation of $200 or less is matched by the U.S. taxpayer times 6. This is absurd. It's something that if it passed, Tony, that would threaten our representative republic.
Agreed. It failed last night in the Senate. Then there was an attempt to change the filibuster rules. They had a filibuster in the Senate since the very beginning of the Senate. That failed when two Democrats said, no, we're not changing the rules. Christian Sinema and our friend from West Virginia. The question here, you've had Chuck Schumer for the last year using this threat of nuking the filibuster as kind of a saber-rattling, threatening Republicans. He's now lost that. Did Chuck Schumer overstep last night?
There's no doubt about it. It was a huge tactical and strategic error. And I find it interesting because I did an interview about 3 days ago and found a quote from 2005 by none other than Chuck Schumer saying that if the filibuster was removed, it would threaten our democracy. So which is it, Chuck? Clearly he has principles of convenience, where when the filibuster protects his interests and his worldview, it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. But when it stalls his agenda, it's destroying democracy. That's very inconsistent. And of course, we know he was either lying in 2005 or he's lying now.
Yeah, I think strategically for the Democrats, that was a really bad move last night. I think Mitch McConnell is the winner there. I say that I saw this as a massive game of political chicken, and Chuck Schumer's left with nothing but feathers because I think he no longer has that threat over the head of Republicans. And I think now you will see Mitch McConnell be able to stand up to pretty much every agenda item of this administration.
Yeah, with Joe Manchin, he's from a very red state. And, there's talk of him maybe running for governor, going back and running for governor. I don't know exactly what he wants to do, but that's certainly a possibility. And if he were to bow to all of the left's agenda, he would have absolutely no chance. He'd have a snowball's chance in Hades if he did that. Right. So Sinema is a surprise, quite frankly, and we're very fortunate. But I think what we're going to see in November is a repeat of what we just saw in a few months back, where there's going to be a swing of about 12 to 16 percentage points. And Democrats, there's a lot of seats, Tony, that are +4, Democrat +6, +8. And those are going to be lost. And I think we could pick up as many as 50 seats. I'm not saying we will. There's a long time between now and then.
Right.
But if Leader McCarthy was asked the other day if he had 3 wishes, what would they be? And he said that the election is today, the election is today, and the election is today.
Very true, because in politics, a day is a lifetime, and a lifetime a day. Congressman Fallon, great to talk with you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Tony. God bless you.
All right.